Hello and welcome to CLLAN, CLL Advocates Network, for our first webinar, which is going to be going into some depth and discussing developing collaborations between patient groups and clinical groups working together to improve patient outcomes. Next slide. Just a few introductory notes to our topic and some housekeeping is what's going to follow next. Next slide. We'll spend the first few minutes with myself and my co-host Nick York, welcoming you and going through what you need to know. And then the bulk of the meeting is going to be some panel discussions, some really excellent discussions that will bring the patient's perspective. We'll have 4 10-minute presentations from France, Italy, Israel, and the United Kingdom. And then we'll have 2 outstanding clinical group presentations. We'll have time for your questions, and then there'll be conclusions. Let me go through my introductions of our speakers right now. But first, I'm going to tell you about the housekeeping, so maybe we can go back to that slide. You'll be muted throughout this. To ask a question, please use the Q&A chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And this webinar is being recorded, so if you miss part of it, please tune in again. It'll be archived in the next few weeks on the CLLAN website, which you should be visiting anyways because it's got a lot of useful information. And the link is there on the slide for you, CLLadvocates.net. Next slide. So I'm Dr. Brian Kaufman. I'm a retired family doctor and a CLL patient myself, and I was the co-founder and now the Chief Medical Officer, Executive Vice President of the US-based CLL Society, a not-for-profit dedicated to the unmet needs of the CLL community. And my co-host for today is Nick York. I've had the privilege of working with Nick for, I've lost how many count of how many years. Nick is the voluntary chair, which is a ton of work for the CLL Advocates Network, and works as the patient advocacy healthcare liaison officer at Leukemia Care in the United Kingdom. And as I said, Nick will be our co-host for today. Pierre Aumont is from France. Pierre will be our first expert advocate speaking today. He's a board member of SILLC, which is the French organization dedicated for CLL and Waldenström's patients. He is also the vice chair of the CLL Advocates Network and has been elected as a patient representative in the European network EuroBloodNet. Giora Sharf from Israel. Giora is the director of the Israeli support group Flute of Life and is a co-founder of the CLL Advocates Network, which really did pioneering work in the area of blood cancer advocacy. I really look forward to Giora sharing his experience with us today. Felice Bombaci is from Italy. Felice is a member of the Italian Association of Leucemie-linfomi and Myeloma, AIL, and the coordinator of AIL's patient groups of hematology neoplasms, including CLL. Felice is also a member of the CLL Advocates Network Steering Committee. Thanks for being with us today, Felice. And I've already introduced Nick, who's our chair, and myself as a member. Besides the expert advocates we have 2 clinical experts that will be joining us today. Professor Chris Fagan from the United Kingdom. Professor Fagan is the director of the School of Medicine at Cardiff University. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, Chris. Chris is an outstanding researcher and thinker in the area of CLL. And Dr. Renata Valuska is from the United Kingdom also. Dr. Valuska is a hematologist at the Royal Bournemouth Hospital, a very famous hospital in the history of CLL, for basic research that was done there over the last several decades. And she has the important position as chair of the United Kingdom CLL Forum. Thank you, Renata, for accepting our invitation. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker, Pierre. who will give you some best practices on collaboration between patient groups and clinical groups in France, where he directs patient services for CLL and Waldenström's patients.
Okay, thank you everybody for being present at this webinar. I hope it will be interesting for all of us and all of you. Well, the topic today is the relationship and the cooperation between the patient associations and the clinicians. And I decided to focus on one example related to the context we are all experimenting now, unfortunately, and that is, of course, the COVID pandemic. So what happened in France during the first wave of this COVID? We had, I think it was not only in France, but in France it was very significant. We had great difficulties to get scientifically reliable and stable information from all the sides, so to say. Especially, we had political decision that were uncertain and partly inconsistent, which is of course very difficult to follow. We had a profusion of often contradictory information on the social networks. That's not only for this topic, but it was very, very confusing. And last but not least, and even worse, different answers coming from different healthcare providers. So you may remember the statements, the different statements of Professor Raoult from Marseille, who were known well worldwide, and the statement of Professor Wood was quite different from the statements of other clinicians as far as the pandemic was concerned. So, and other point, absolutely key for us, CLL patient, CLL was not usually specifically mentioned among the sensitive diseases with regard to the coronavirus. We had a lot of information about cancers. We had a lot of information about diabetes, etc., etc. Not specifically about CLL. So the CLL patient were lost, and they said that to us, and urgently needed information and advice. That's the reason why we had to act, of course. What were the risks for the patient? First risk, confusion between vulnerability and contagion. It was very difficult to make the difference between the two things. Wrong ranking of the pathologies. That was a very usually heard sentence, COVID-19 being worse than cancer, which of course is not always the case. Consequence, of course, postponing urgent treatments to avoid COVID-19 infection. Very bad for the patient, of course. And other topics, a little bit different, not clinical topics, but very important, changes in professional status, such as teleworking, unemployment, etc. And last but not least, of course, financial issues. So SILLC, as an association focusing on CLL, had to act as soon as possible in order to bring information to the patients. So, what are the action that we took? Webinars, I will come back to that more in detail later on. 4 webinars, 3 during the lockdown and the last one immediately after. Scientific synthesis, of course, cautiously selected because, as I said, there was a lot of different opinions, and we published these syntheses on our websites. Official recommendation, we circulated also recommendation issued by the government and the health authorities. and relevant international statements such as CLLAN's statement translated into French, of course. So, and we contributed to a different survey in this period, focused on patient behavior and healthcare access. Those were quite interesting, and we have now a good deal of results, quite interesting. But I will focus now on the webinars. We were not alone to have these difficulties and to supporting the patient in this very difficult period. So we decided to co-organize this webinar, so that to join our forces with two others, French association, that are we as CLL and Waldenström disease, FLE, focusing on lymphomas, and AF3M for multiple myeloma. So what did we want to address? What was the agenda of these webinars? Of course, trying to tackle the patient's main concerns related to the pandemic. First, of course, coronavirus and hematological malignancy. What is the impact of this disease on the patient, on our patient? How to better support the patient during the lockdown, because of course they were isolated as everyone. Social issues, of course, I already mentioned that. Legal issues, quite important. And last but not least, psychological issues, because of course the lockdown is something which is quite difficult to support. And that was mainly during the lockdown, and which is quite important, how to better manage the end of the lockdown with the public life opening up again. That's not simple to come from a lockdown and well, progressively come back to a normal life. So that's perhaps the main point in relation to the topic of this webinar, the panel of speakers covering various and relevant specialties. We wanted to cover, of course, the specialists for infection diseases, hematologist, oncopsychologist, psychosomatic therapy specialist, coaches, and quite important as well, health legal expertise. And that is the point where the cooperation between the patient associations and the different circle of groups of clinicians is absolutely key. We, for instance, at SILLC, have a scientific committee with the better known CLL specialist or Waldenström specialist. So we were quite well positioned in order to get those speakers with the sufficient authority, of course. But though we don't have only a relation with the hematologist, we have also a relation with other specialists, and through the clinician we are cooperating well, usually with, we had access to all these categories of specialties that was absolutely key in order to treat the subject we had to treat and get the best information and the best support for the patient that were attending these 4 webinars. The results, do remember that we have for SILLC something like 2,500 people, and even almost 3,000 who are well, usually dealing with our website. But for these 4 webinars, we had almost 1,000 attendees who could benefit from the clear, understandable, and updated information, ask questions, and get answers live, so to say. So it's a very good result. And we could also replay the 4 webinars on our website, and we could observe a significant increase of the visit on the website during this period and after, which means that the goal we had was reached, and we were quite satisfied. But do remember that a relationship between the patient association and the clinician was key for the 3 associations in order to get this success. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I may introduce my friend Giora Sharf, who is absolutely well known in the world of the patient advocates, himself a CML patient and director of Flute of Life, an association in Israel.
Well, hello. Thank you very much, Pierre. Appreciate it. My name is Giora Sharf. I'm from Israel. I am a CML patient for 20 years, and I am very much involved with advocacy on both national and also global level. I started the Flute of Light, that's all blood cancer patients in Israel, also CML patient organization in Israel, and I'm also co-founder of the Leukemia Patient Advocates Foundation, which is hosting also CLL Advocates Network. So thank you very much for inviting me. So I'll start talking about first on the international level, and I think all of you are familiar very much with these scientific big bodies of, for example, EAJ, the European Hematology Association, ESMO, the European Society of Medical Oncology, ECHO, ASCO, and also EBMT and others. There's a lot of collaboration between patient advocates and this scientific organization. For example, I still remember at EAJ about 8 years ago, when we convinced them very hard to open a patient track within the scientific session of EAJ. And then I remember that Yana, who is a member of the CLL steering committee, gave the first talk ever in that meeting about quality of life of CML patients. We are allocated a small room of about 50 people, and the room was full all over. So that the success of that session led to the expansion of this collaboration between advocates and the scientific committee of EAJ. And today there are a lot of sessions within the scientific program of EAJ. It's a whole program which is set and planned and executed by a committee of patient advocates. The same is true for ESMO and ECHO and the other organizations. So there is a huge collaboration between patient advocates, patient organization, and the scientific. And just for one example, if we take ESMO, about 3 years ago, they have recognized patient advocates as a professional healthcare provider. And actually, they even gave us, patient advocates, the right to be members of ESMO. And we can even vote when they have election on the president or functioning body of the ESMO. So this is showing the great advance that we have in recognition of patient advocacy together with scientists, hematologists, and doctors. When we talk and when we come to present our opinion, actually we need to understand that we have to use real-world evidence and we have to produce it. And we cannot come just with anecdotal examples of cases. We have to come with proved scientific data that we have collected from our patients, which can show what are the perspective of the patient on different topics. So, for example, I was lucky to be involved in a couple of projects, big global projects, on producing such real-world evidence. One of them was the Adherence survey, global survey we did within the CML Advocate Network, when we distributed questionnaire through the 3 local hematologists association in Germany, in Italy, and France. And actually, they gave the same questionnaire we use for the online platform to the patient who came from appointment. And we worked together on that. This project was very successful. There were a lot of findings which are very relevant to hematologists and doctors, and our members of the network are presenting the findings in many meetings where doctors are participating. Another one, latest example, is a TFR study we did in our network, which now we are producing from the finding. We are producing educational material both for patient and for clinician. And the doctors are part of the group that is producing and supporting the production of this educational material as another example of a good collaboration with clinicians. You know that CLLAN, the European Leukemia Net, is producing guidelines to treat different hematology diseases. And for example, in the CML arena, just now in 2020, the new guidelines how to treat CML patient came out and was published in March this year. We are working together with leading hematologists that were members of the team who produced these guidelines, how to produce a patient-friendly version, because the guidelines are written in scientific languages and which is not very understood by patient advocates and patients. And we want to make sure that every patient, every member of our organization will be able to read patient-friendly version, and we are collaborating together. Also, my friend Felice and I were lucky to be part of a team of EORTC, which was producing a patient-reported outcome measure, a questionnaire, how to measure the quality of life of CML patient. It's important to work together, patient advocates and expert physician, when you develop such form, and we are doing it together in many instances. Next slide, please. So I think today the patient advocacy is changing since the time that I knew what advocacy was 19 years ago. And today patient advocates are doing many things that in the past was just a dream. And one of them is being involved in research. So there is an organization in Europe called the EICML, which is the European Investigator for CML, which meets every year all the leading investigators in our disease. And they are inviting also representatives from our community, from the patient advocates, to work together to think about the future of CML, how we want to develop, what kind of treatment, and where the disease management is going. So we are working together as a team, and that's another example. There is also an international body of International CML Foundation, which is a group of CML doctors, leading doctors from all over the world. And we have members, advocate member on 2 big groups that they are leading 2 projects. One of them is on TFR, how to improve the chance of CML patients to stop treatment and how to increase the percentage of patients who can stop. And also a big project on big data that we are members of, and patient advocates are sitting together in these bodies together with the scientists and the doctors. We are sitting when a new drug development steering committee together with doctors, together with a pharma company investigators, working together how to develop more friendly patient clinical trials and also more friendly drugs for patients. And this is happening in many companies, in many fields, in many types of cancer. And I think this is the future, working together, collaborating, patient advocates, pharma researchers, and the scientists, the hematologists. One of the studies we did in Israel was collaboration of our patient organization together with a CML working party of the hematologists. And we did a survey last year about the quality of life of CML patients, study on different TKI, because this was never studied. What is the difference between a patient who is taking one TKI to another? Are the quality of life similar or different? So we did a study, and there was some interesting finding which we presented at poster at ASH. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about national collaboration. Why is it important? Why is it important that we, the patient advocate, collaborate with doctors, with hematologists? We have to understand that the doctor, the hematologist, is the first point of contact when a patient is diagnosed with this disease. So we really would like this hematologist to refer the patient to our patient organization. The slogan of our patient organization is that membership in a patient organization is part of your treatment journey. So we hope that the doctors will collaborate and work together with us and send the patients who are diagnosed to us. It's still not happening. I can admit that this is one of the points that I'm still trying to understand. Why is it not happening? Why are the doctors not referring all the patients, just some of them? I think it's on the average only about 12 to 14% of patients in a specific disease are members of patient organization, and this is something that we have to improve, and I'm sure it will happen, but it takes time. Also, we are members in Israel, for example. They have working groups of different diseases for MPN, for CML, for lymphoma. We are members. We are sitting there, members of our board of the patient organization, sitting on those boards, working together with the doctors on different topics, different projects. But still, there are about 8 working groups. We are member only of 3 of them. So there is still a lot of place for improvement here. For years, the Israeli Hematology Association has given us a free booth at their annual meeting. It's a 3-day meeting, and they gave us a booth where we present our material. And I think always, is this really type of collaboration we would like to have, or is it just a tick box? And my feeling is that it is still a tick box and not really a true collaboration. For example, the paper that we wrote about the TFR study, which was published in Leukemia magazine, one of the leading scientific magazines out there. I submitted an abstract to the Israeli annual hematologist meeting last year, and I received an answer that in our meeting, the hematologist meeting, only doctors can speak. Somebody who is not a doctor cannot speak in that meeting. So I know it's not representing everywhere in Israel. Maybe they are more conservative, but I know it will change. The only question is when. We are organizing patient conferences in collaboration with hematologists and doctors in almost most hospitals in Israel. We work together and produce patient meeting, and that's extremely important. And also when we go to scientific meeting, we ask the doctors, hematologists to either write a summary or take a video and summarize the news about each disease in those meetings. I think the COVID has changed a little bit the collaboration, and I think this was one of the first time that our Israeli Hematologists Association came to us, the patient organization, and said that there is a project they would like to lead, which is transporting patients from home to the hospital and back, because they cannot use a public transportation and they don't have their own car. So they asked us to help, and they said, this is a project we, the Israeli Hematology Association, cannot organize. But we think that this is something that you, patient organization, can do. And actually, we took it upon ourselves, and we've been organizing for the last 6 months transportation for hundreds of patients from home to the hospital and back. And last but not least, because patients are concerned to come to hospital with the COVID situation, together with some hematologists, we have produced videos that is encouraging the patient not to give up the appointment, not to give up the treatment. It's important, and we are working together in that to improve the compliance of the patient in regards to their treatment. So those are examples, many of them, and I want to thank you very much for your listening and for your attention. And now I would like to handle the microphone or the computer to my close friend, which we call each other our CML brother, Felice Bombaci from Italy. And he is a very, very involved advocate in many fields. And Felice, please.
Thank you, Giora. It's for me an honor to be introduced by you. You are an example for the whole community of patient advocate. It is a thanks to your support that 11 years ago, I founded the Italian patient CML group. Next slide. just a few words about AIL. Our organization, the Italian Association Against Leucemie-linfomi and Myeloma, was founded on 8 April 1969 by personality like Professor Albert Sabin, who discovered the vaccine, developing the vaccine polio, anti-polio. And also one of the main mission of AIL is financial scientific research through GMEMA. GMEMA is the Adult Blood Disease Research Group, a no-profit organization formed by the scientific researcher and connected 150 hematology centers. National present of the AIL is 81 provincial session and 22,000 volunteers work for AIL to collect money for running fundraising and for service for patients. And we have a closer relationship with the main hospital hematological center in Italy. So it is 11 years ago, I founded internal AIL, inside AIL, the first Italian patient group, because I am a CML patient group. And in 2009, I started with the help of the Giora, Sharf, and the CML community, the first CML patient group in Italy. And our group is formed only by patient and caregiver, and we have a good relationship with the GMEMA, the Italian cooperative working group on hematology disease, but also with the other research group like Italian Foundation Against Lymphoma, Italian Foundation Against myelodysplasia, and also Italian Society of Hematology, and so and so. So next slide. From 2009 to this year, we organize many meetings for the patient, because information is very important for patient, and also to exchange information with the doctor. And in this year, during this time, we meet more than 10,000 patients and family members, and the majority of the experts in hematology in Italy. And we collaborate very close with the organization, umbrella organization in Europe and international, like CLLAN. As Giora said before, it's important to collaborate between the patient group and the scientific community. And it is necessary to create a network of the excellence, favor the development of the network and the cooperative research group, and facilitate the sharing of best practice among the various specialist features of the blood center. Only in this way, the patients are guaranteed to same diagnostic and therapeutic opportunity through the national territory, on the European territory, in the world. Our aims as patient advocate is to grant this opportunity to all patients around the world. Next slide. So in 2018, I proposed to GMEMA CLL Working Party to realize the CLL journey, patient journey project. The primary involved people are people with CLL, clinical hematologists, specialized center distributed through the national territory, and institutional representative at local and national level. And the main objective, the main aims of this project is to provide a tool to physician, patient, and institutional for design to improve disease and resource management process in order to improve the quality of life of the patient and their family. With this project, we would like to take a picture of the reality life, of the real life of the burden of the disease of the CLL is on all patients. Next slide. This research is an exploration, a cross-sectional quantitative questionnaire that involves 668 CLL patients managed at 36 Italian hematology institutions. And the information was anonymously collected through a self-administered questionnaire that include 34 specific questions covering 4 domains that explored potential source of anxiety related to CLL and patient satisfaction with the process of care. And you can see the path of this project, and just last year in December we have a press conference where we presented to the journalist and with the politician, with the member of our parliament, we talk about this project and the gap shown by the answer of the patient. Next slide, please. And our project was accepted as an imposter session from by European Hematology Association, EHA. Unfortunately, COVID stopped the possibility to go in Frankfurt to show in presence, face-to-face with the physician, this result of our project, but was showed in the EHA Virtual Congress in June. And as you can see, this project is running also on behalf of the CLL Advocates Network. As you can see, the communication, the result, the primary result is about the communication of diagnosis. The nearly 80% of the patient declared their satisfaction about communication of diagnosis, which was disclosed by hematologist in an appropriate hospital area and using an understandable and comprehensive language. But the other 20% of people said is not good for them. And a somewhat frequency concern, 81%, was, however, represented by the fear of either not having asked everything or not having understood everything about the clinical follow-up and the outcome of disease. In another aspect, the impact of CLL on quality of life in about 60% of participants, CLL negatively affect the emotional, family, and working life. This was independently from treatment, since 57% of patients were not receiving treatment at the time of the survey. A significantly high emotional distress across the affective, social, and working life was recorded in younger patients in comparison to older ones. Finally, patient indicate 3 areas of potential improvement: quality of life or information, quality of information for the access to clinical trial with the novel agents, intervention aiming at reducing the waiting time in the hospital, and availability of psychological support. Okay, this is shown by this poster in the figure. Thank you. Next slide. In conclusion, we can affirm that the patient group can contribute extensively to making research objectively closer to the real needs of a patient by intervening in the different phases of the research, in particular, firstly, by expressing their preference in terms of clinical trial arms. During the research, supporting enrollment, reporting side effects and their acceptability, and evaluating the most significant endpoint. Later, in the evaluation of quality of life, in particular with the patient report outcome and the evaluation of the cost effectiveness of the therapy. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to my dear friend Nick from UK. Nick, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Felice, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. And I thank Brian for your introduction, so I don't need to tell you too much about me. Leukemia Care, who I work with in the UK, Leukemia Care supports all blood cancer types, but with a primary focus on leukemia, and we also have a special interest in CLL. I work in a particular area that keeps us in close contact with the clinical community, and obviously at this time of the year, never has there been a time when we need those collaborations and build those relations with the clinical community. So I work as the liaison officer, and I think just as a flavour, I put this slide together really because it's Blood Cancer Awareness Month, and I realised before starting, everything is involving a collaboration of some shape or form in all of our activities. And these images are the logos of main organisations that we at Leukemia Care have collaborated with during Blood Cancer Awareness Month. So it's a pleasure to be here on the last day of Blood Cancer Awareness Month. And I've got about 3 columns there on the chart, which really sort of explain the patient group collaborations to help deliver patient support and information. And all of these involve collaboration with the clinical community at every stage. That's to provide validation with the patient information, to support educational events. And if you look at the left-hand side there, you'll notice that I've put CLL support as a much larger size than everybody. And that's probably because the culture in the UK is very much embedded on the relationship and the involvement with the clinical community in all of our activities to do with healthcare delivery now. It's actually mandated in law, and CLL support pioneered this in CLL. My colleagues on our esteemed professor and doctors will explain some of this later, but they were pioneers in developing a relationship with the CLL community. And in the UK, Leukemia Care work very closely with CLL support when it comes to focus and support with the CLL community. And we do that probably with another 4 other charities, which collaborating would be with Lymphoma Action and Blood Cancer UK, who are part of the Blood Cancer Alliance, 16 different blood cancer charities. We all work with Cancer 52, who support the rarer cancers to give a stronger voice. We all work with Cancer Research UK, to deliver initiatives of education and research. Now, what is particularly different as well in the UK as well, we have very strong relationships and engagement with the clinical community. And I'm privileged to actually sit on executive committees with the UK CLL Forum, for example, who shape and deliver CLL care and guidance with the BSH, the British Society of Haematology. You know, patient groups and advocates have a full place on the executive there to help ensure that patients stay in the centre of the room. And again, you'll see a logo there for the National Cancer Research Institute. We have a similar place on the clinical trials, design and delivery groups. And there's 3 logos there, for example, that just represent healthcare education. So basically, if we look at the 3 lines of work we do, patient support, patient information, clinical education and clinical support with grants and information. And then to the right, all of my colleagues that have joined us before that really help pave the way for us in international advocacy. We also participate in our collaborations of international groups and alliance. And every single one of those involves collaboration with the clinical community. So I just thought I'd touch on that before we move forward to the next slide. So I don't want to go too much into this because my friend Pierre covered in great detail about activities and focus on the French group collaboration and digitization of all activities to help meet these fast changing and unknown needs of the clinical, of the patient community. But I think I'll just touch on those again. So, you know, when we looked at leukemia care, like everybody else, you know, I put a few bullet points there that became apparent and have reflected in everybody else's talk. The first thing we needed to do was to actually understand what those needs were. And also that's not just the patients, but the healthcare professional community also has changing needs with redeployment of services, with reduction of capacity. Everything was in the unknowns. And obviously without in-person capabilities anymore, there was an immediate halt on all in-person activities. Like everybody else, we had to quickly reprioritize, and we needed knowledge to be able to do that. We all got hit really hard. Let's face it, we've all been hit really hard as charities. So we have a reduced income. Does that mean we have a reduced capability? I think we'll find out a little bit more about that in discussions. So Pierre's touched on this in great detail, so I don't want to go on that. It was important that we as a charity reorganize our services for digital delivery and operation. And it was a new world for all of us. 1 minute we're all working in normal conditions. The next minute we're having to work from home and having to learn to navigate and surf this new environment. And we make mistakes. It's quite raw at times, but it does seem to be accepted, more accepted. Maybe it's made us feel a bit more human. And it's enabled us to reach more people. And I think one thing we did notice with COVID was we all were hit with an increased demand on our services. More people unknown, more people in trouble. And because we had a digital connection, everybody else was having to become digitally connected. So they've connected with us. So reflecting on this, I don't know at the end of the day how we can evaluate the quality of our connections, but by all of our new collaborations, you know, the COVID has helped us build and strengthen our relationships and collaborations and improved our ability to be able to connect in real time. It's a lot easier to get things done, and we're reaching more people. So, you know, as a response to the changing needs, digital connection is doing a great job, and we're all doing a fantastic job, and we need these collaborations with the clinical community, and they are there. They also need the information, and we're reaching more people with less. So I think there are some pluses and not just negative to this, but it is a difficult time. It's tiring. I don't know about everybody else, but back-to-back videos is wearing us out a little bit. So I'll just touch briefly. I've got 5 bullet points here of some activities that Leukemia Care carried out in practice that brought the community together during COVID. I won't go into any great detail about surveys because Professor Fagan is going to touch and focus on an example there. But I did touch on the fact that, you know, everybody, and Giora, and I think Felice has also looked at that, we needed to find out exactly what was the landscape like, what were the challenges of our patients, and to do that, we've collaborated in great depth with the clinical community and patient groups, different patient groups, especially the CLL support and the UK CLL forum for CLL. These surveys, Leukemia Care carried out across all of the different leukemia types, because as I say, we support the broad ranges of leukemias. So it's not just on CLL, but with CLL, we did some extra special work, which colleagues will touch about later. But it's also important that, you know, we were able to get the direct voice of patients. So we made sure we focused on patient and healthcare professional advisory panels during this time to actually find out over time, what are the changing needs, what are the priorities? And actually that's something that all of us as charities should do, and many of us will do. You know, patients and patient needs will help change, will help shape the priorities and the strategy of the charity to identify the unmet needs and priorities. And then the advisory panels of the healthcare professionals will help validate that and you know, help us to deliver that. And as I said, the culture in the UK is geared up for that. So part of digitization and the new shape was webinars, again, involving you know, strong collaboration with the clinical groups. Digital connections enabled us to connect with those. A lot of webinars, it seems to be back-to-back webinars these days. And at the same time, another activity that we focused on during this time, bringing clinical community and patient groups and advocates together, has been healthcare professional education. And that's the example I'm going to use after here, really, because everybody else is touching it in other areas. But I think there has been some issues that have come out of COVID that have really actually aided a need for some focus on healthcare professional education. And to do that, we've had to strengthen our relationships with the clinical community to deliver that. And that's an area I'm about to touch on, which is in e-learning education tools. We've always focused as a charity on providing e-learning education, be it nurse e-learning, be it in other healthcare professions. And one of the primary areas has always been in early diagnosis, e-learning tools for primary care for GPs with different colleges. So I'll touch on that in a minute after this slide, so I won't go into too much detail there. But I think one thing that has really been evident of a change since COVID and bringing the community together was patients have had nowhere to go. They haven't been able to visit their clinics. There's been very little face-to-face with the doctors. We've had no in-person education events. But what we did have, we had an in-person network of local support groups. And I think before COVID, we had about 30 to 50, I think it was in the 30s actually, if I get that right. We had about 30 odd in-person support groups in a network in different locations across the UK. That's now expanded to 70 virtual support groups. So the number of patients that are now connecting with us in need of support and able to do so because of digital connection has massively increased. But to deliver that, we need people who can talk about the issues, explain the medicine, and keep patients informed. So it's really involved a much greater collaboration with the clinical community. And I think it's with their collaboration that it has also helped grow, because they are the gatekeepers, as we're all aware, to ensuring patients reach those that can support them. Next slide, please. So the example I'm going to use, I think our brief was, let's talk about an example that has brought the community together during COVID or now in the present or past. So I'm using the example of our historic work in collaborating with the clinical community to help educate primary care. I think in CLL, we're quite aware that we have challenges with primary care at times in terms of disconnect between knowledge of specific needs of a CLL patient, and I'll use CLL as an example, versus infrequent contact, for example, with the hematologist. And one of the key needs in improving outcomes for cancer patients is early diagnosis. So spot leukemia, everyone's familiar with. This is a campaign that we used to run in Blood Cancer Awareness Month. We now use that in the UK as an all-year activity. In fact, that's on my signature. That's basically my logo that I carry with more year. So we collaborate, Leukemia Care collaborate with the Royal College of General Practitioners, who are the main educational and foundation body for GPs in the UK. And we also collaborate with Gateway C, which is a newly formed national platform to educate primary care on cancer. And that is actually prescriptively given to the across England for free access for GPs to help educate them and understand on cancer. And we also, you know, as part of that collaboration, to deliver the education, we need a group of specialist hematologists, GP educators, to help inform these initiatives, help us deliver the in-person events, and to help us create online tools. So Blood Cancer Awareness Month, we just launched 2 new early diagnosis modules, and with the help of the clinical conditioning groups across England. They have helped raise awareness of early diagnosis needs and also of the services we're offering. Next slide, please. So, why is it more relevant during the current crisis? I think everybody's heard the headlines. Patients aren't presenting, patients aren't wanting to present to their GPs. Symptoms of COVID are misunderstood potentially for symptoms of other conditions. So at the moment, there has been a serious reduction of cancer diagnosis rates in all countries. And a lot of that's been due to redeployment of resources. GPs aren't really offering in-person services at the moment to try and mitigate risks. Everything's remote, over the phone. So there's a suggested backlog of undiagnosed cancers. And there's some figures here that represent UK figures, which give an indication. If we use the 2-week wait that, for referrals for suspected cancers, we're looking at the data that during the peak of COVID, during April, this was down by over 60%. 60% of people that would normally be diagnosed with the cancer weren't being. And that improved until July, to around 20%. But now we think it's going the other way as COVID increases. So this really did increase the need for us to actually focus on how can we make sure we continue with this message and strengthen that during Blood Cancer Awareness Month. And I think the point I put at the bottom there was just to educate, just to emphasize that, okay, CLL is one leukemia. And in many cases, there's not such an early need for early diagnosis in CLL, but there is a need for access to appropriate information and support. But amongst all leukemias, if you look at the average of late diagnosis or emergency diagnosis, we know that early diagnosis improves outcomes. Leukemia patients are being diagnosed late. So next slide, please. So we go about this with a two-pronged approach. I think people are aware of Spot Leukemia. So basically it's raising signs and symptoms campaign. We do that through a national public awareness and new digital GP learning tools and webinars. So I touched on that earlier. Just to finish off there, just to remind you, at Leukemia Care, we would provide e-learning tools on GP national education platforms by collaborating and coming together with the clinical community to provide those. And we combine that normally with in-person learning events, which we will have in different regions for different faculties, which are the education groups for the different GP groups. Because of COVID, we've had to do webinars again. I think we've all gone webinar crazy, but actually again, there's a positive thing there. Our GP education webinars are attracting 150 GPs. Our in-person GP education events we managed to get 40 GPs. GPs having to attend in person need to get locums in to cover them, to be able to lead their surgeries. They're busy people. So again, another positive to what COVID is doing to encourage collaboration, ability to connect, and ability to reach people. And I'd like to thank you for your attention, and a couple of links there if you want any more information. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Renata Walenska. Renata is chair of the UK CLL Forum, and I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you all for inviting me to speak today, and good morning and good evening to wherever you are. So what I would like to present next few slides, basically what CLL scene looks like in the UK. And I do apologize because this is certainly not comprehensive in the time I was given. So when I see the patient in clinic, it's not just two of us, there is much more there. So you can see just a handful of institutions who are involved when I'm seeing the patient. And I would try to outline the interaction between these institutions, charities, when I care for that patient. So it's very important that that when I look after the patient, I involve patient in all aspects of their care. So to start, let's just look at the treatment. So I'll briefly do an overview of a standard treatment and then clinical trials. Before I start on standard treatment, it is important to highlight that we've got amazing drugs in CLL, truly revolutionized the way we treat CLL since 2014, when ibrutinib and idelalisib became first available. But that obviously increased the cost of drug, and you can see the budget being spent globally on drugs is just going exponentially. And on the next slide, you can see how the access to those amazing drugs is limited to where you live. So obviously there is huge, huge inequality. Let's go back to the UK and how we treat the patient. So this is quite a busy table of how we treat patients in the UK. So we are quite fortunate in the UK. We've got National Health Service, and where the treatment is provided as an evidence-based medicine. So on the first column, you've got box standard drugs, the cheap, the everyday drugs, which are within tariff. So this is payment by results, which is set by between the GP and NHS. Then in the middle, you've got the chemotherapy, the standard, the old-fashioned immunotherapy. So for instance, rituximab is there. So this is PBR, so tariff excluded, but it's under the chemotherapy umbrella, and this is agreed with special commissioning and NHS England. And then you've got the expensive drugs. So it's very difficult to say which are the expensive drugs. So we usually say that that's ballpark figure of £10,000 per course, which will equate to about 11,000 euros per course, or $13,000 per course. So obviously, because these are very expensive drugs, as you can see, we need to have first, ideally, license. So if Europe EMA approves the drug, that means they license in the UK. So MHRA approved, so that's equal. And then that drug undergoes a very thorough scrutiny through National Institute of Health and Care Excellence. So the pharma submits the application, then there is a group of statistician, economics, doctors going through that appraisal that we as a clinicians got chance to comment, and same with patient groups. They can comment on appraisal, and if NICE proves that this drug is efficacious in particular indication, then it gets approved. And we've got Cancer Drug Fund, which been a bunch of money set by government, and it's being funded, that those drugs are funded. The hospitals then have got 3 months to make it available to the patient, and they have to prove correct use to be reimbursed. Otherwise, they have to pay for through their own pockets. So there is another stream for unlicensed medication. So this is very rare when we do that in UK, and this is usually a compassionate scheme. But again, it's not that easily available either. So obviously pharma need to make the drug available. For us, then I need to express interest to my local hospital, and the Drug and Therapeutic Committee of the local hospital needs to assess that request through evidence, safety and cost. There is, of course, one more, what we call kind of jokingly, the dark side, the private practice. So in hematology, this is vanishingly rare, and very rarely the patients are treated through that means. And even so, the insurance companies would want to see the license, whether it's an FDA or EMA license, to approve that treatment. So the other, obviously, avenue to treat patients is clinical trials. So within clinical trials, the important one to say that currently the main clinical trials are either involved with pharma or pure pharma clinical trials. So there will be two different clinical trials. So obviously commercial ones, purely funded by pharma, and then a scientific one where NCRI is involved. So you can see there are different groups of NCRI. There is obviously one for hematology, and we are very active when we involving people like Nick and CLL Support Association. That's obviously to do with the CLL clinical trials, to discuss those trials, to see what the patient thinks, and you as a patient body have got very important say how those clinical trials are run. Obviously, I'm skimming completely here. On the previous slide, I just want to add that the other important things, it's a CLL biobank. So you can see if patients are in clinical trial, their samples are being stored in CLL biobank. We've got Human Tissue Act. So this is an important part legislation to make sure that your tissue, which is deposited in any biobank or whether in hospital archive, is well looked after and not abused. Then there is a Genomic England, which was a very exciting project which been started a few years back. So I've got 3 slides just to briefly tell you about it. And of course, many of clinical trials being funded by charities. Now, this post-pandemic, well, obviously during pandemic that will change because all charities are running into difficulties at the moment. So very briefly about this exciting study, which was 100,000 genome project. So you can see the aim was to perform 100,000 genomes. So you can see there were over 26,000 cancer cases and 74,000 rare diseases. And when you look at what's happened with the CLL, so we used CLL samples, mainly from clinical trials. So you can see here pie chart. Next slide, please. So you can see pie chart of mainly frontline studies used in that project. There was very small number of relapse refractory patients, and you can see clear was untreated patients. And the brief summary, so the paper is not published yet, but the main message from the 100,000 genome is that essentially what it's important, looking at the genome, it's not only coding, but also non-coding part of genome. And they have identified 4 new different groups for CLL. So watch this space for publication on this project. So moving on to support. So this is a very important part when I look after those patients. And obviously, you know, as Nick suggested, I'm a chair of forum. So what's important is that late Professor Hamblin, who some of you, I know Dr. Kaufman and Nick knew Professor Hamblin personally. Can you just click, please? So this is Terry, who was larger than life, and he's got even streets in Bournemouth named after him. So he set up UK CLL Forum, and CLL Support Association grew from that. And the main part initially from CLL Forum, you can see that's just lifted from the constitution of CLL Forum, is about promoting clinical trials. Now that's been taken over for NCRI. NCRI has been set up in 2001. So we're really concentrating on the latter 3. So it's about collaboration. So we've got scientists on board, and we facilitate that basic science, and it's very important for clinicians and scientists to talk to each other. But of course, we've got patients, we've got Nick who sits there, and we've got people from CLL Support Association, so we can talk together. And obviously, if there are problems, that's obviously being raised through patients' representative. And we're creating guidelines for CLL and related condition, but also the very, very important part of our role is to promote education. So not only education of the patients, so Nick already mentioned a number of different webinars. We've organized obviously we had normal meetings before COVID, but also we trying to educate professionals. So we mainly do that by regular 6-monthly meetings, but hopefully during my stint as a CLL chair, I can expand on that. And one exciting thing what I would like to do, which I was talking to Nick already, to start doing a little podcasts on the back of Leukemia Forum podcasts. So this is our website. So this is shot on a website, and you can see on the left bottom, as soon as pandemic hit, we posted a practical guide for physicians what to do when we need to treat CLL patients. So Nick already alluded that obviously when pandemic hit, it was very difficult to offer patients chemotherapy. So we tried to come up with ideas. There were plenty of other organizations within the UK, and as you know, ASH also set up this practical guide, and also EHA as well. Next slide, please. And I just don't want to repeat what Nick already said. So so there is a huge collaboration network between all these, and I apologize if I didn't add more, but I was just trying to concentrate on CLL. So this is to help me and to also help specialist nurses. So Nick and with Leukemia Care run courses for specialist nurses, and Nick also mentioned about educating GP. Next slide, please. And for patients, of course, Leukemia Care and CLL support provide huge support, not only with booklets, but also there are grants for if patient cannot travel to see their specialist, they can apply, for instance, in Leukemia Care for a grant, so they can come attend. That's just one of the little projects what Leukemia Care is running. And it's so in summary. Actually, when I was doing that summary, until I've heard a particularly Italian presentation, I thought we're doing quite well. I think I'm quite proud that obviously within NHS, we're quite equitable, and even the very expensive drugs are available to all. In a way, once they're available on the cancer drug funds, the price it's irrelevant. But of course, it's because it's evidence-based, so it goes through the process, and we truly, especially with having NICE, which is amazing organization looking through safety, efficacy and cost. Then of course we've got clinical trials. Obviously it's very difficult to run them during pandemic, and we collaborating with pharma, and I'm quite proud how we collaborating with clinicians, patients and pharma to provide the best care. And pharma is very interested about the educating patients. Well, what's bad? Of course, with evidence, safety, efficacy comes bureaucracy. Going through NICE takes months, and then there could be reappraisal and appeals, so it's extremely slow. And as you notice, because we're looking at the specialist commissioning, and local hospitals are looking at their own decision through drug and therapeutic committees, we do get some postcode discrepancies. The problem with clinical trials, they are pharma driven. So of course they've got their design, especially, well, they're getting better now. So some of the standard arms were not standard in the UK, and was very difficult to run some of the trials. And for me as a clinician, having rare disease, that's a difficulty, because if somebody has got CLL, it's great. I can give them ibrutinib, venetoclax, whatever I think it's appropriate. But then if I've got a related to CLL, very rare condition, there is no data. There are no clinical trials. Nobody wants to do clinical trials. So on one hand, you know, at 9:05, I will see a patient with CLL, great, you've got ibrutinib. And then 10 minutes later, I will see somebody with relapsed refractory splenic marginal zone lymphoma, and I can't give them ibrutinib. And that's very difficult, obviously, to do. Obviously, I'm looking for ways to go around it, but it is difficult. And finally, it's an elephant in the room. Next, please. It's Brexit. So whatever I was proud in the previous slides where there is a system which works, after Brexit, nobody really knows how things will pan out. So on that note, I would like to introduce my esteemed colleague, Professor Chris Fagan, who at the beginning of pandemic, who very kindly contacted me and came up with the idea of doing CLL survey, patients and clinicians, which is a very unique way to do it. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Renata. Hold on, everyone. We're going to be quick. We're going to catch up time and get through all this. So this is an effort on behalf of 4 charities. You've heard about them, and a university, because we can't trust ourselves with the maths. So basically, the problem going into COVID is we had no evidence base to know what was going to happen or what we should do. We had no information at all, and we basically had to do our best guess of it. Our presumption at the time, though, was that this may go on for many months, and therefore, if we're really quick off the mark, could we actually learn something that could then directly impact patient care, patient wellbeing, patient information, and clinician education as well. But there was also questions about, would CLL patients get a good deal? Would they be more at risk of COVID? Would they have a higher risk of mortality? Would shielding work, which is the UK way of dealing with this? Maybe the previous treatments patients received or their different staging may affect the outcome if they actually develop COVID. We didn't know any of this. We all had ideas. We had no evidence base for it. Next slide. So basically, we wanted to make contact throughout the CLL fraternity, the scientists, the researchers, the clinicians, the patient groups, and partly as well, it was to offer support to each other because we were all struggling. It takes a lot for people to admit they don't know what to do, but none of us were, but we're all a bit too up ourselves to actually say that. But at least by making contact, we could breach that thing. We wanted to gather data basically about what happened to the patients both at home and if they happened to get COVID in hospital, and we wanted to use that to educate ourselves and our patients. So it's a two-pronged approach. First of all, the patient survey and the patients advocacy groups were going to lead on this, develop a website for which patients could enter data. They had over 1,000 email addresses of their various supporters, so we could quickly mobilize that group and get them involved in a website survey to assess what it was like at home. Next slide. At the same time, what we're going to do is get all the hospital clinicians involved in a different website, but the aim is to link the two together. Ultimately, when we got the data, I'm going to present some of that data to you, but with the same aim. We needed to learn what was happening to our patients and maybe why it was happening and what we could do differently. So basically what happened in the UK, the shutdown was announced on the 23rd of March. We'd actually touched base 4 days earlier about this as an idea when we knew shutdown was coming to assess our patients. In theory, what is meant to happen is all vulnerable people, it's not just people with cancer, people on immunosuppressants, people with asthma, people with diabetes, were meant to receive a shielding letter from the government, giving them permission to be at home and miss work effectively. And the shutdown finished on the 4th of July. One specific aim was, we didn't want one survey, we wanted 3. We wanted to see how the mood of the individual patients changed as this all rolled out. And so the particular areas we're looking at, were they shielding? Did they get COVID? What do they think of the government message? What happened to their CLL care in the hospital? Employment in finance? How are they mentally coping? What other worries came up through this pandemic? And also interested, who were they getting their information from to inform them? And basically, we sent out the first survey on the 27th of March, only 4 days after lockdown. It took us just over a week to put the whole thing together. The original 40 questions, get the website up and running. No sooner we got underway, their own Prime Minister caught COVID. Well, that was a good thing or not, I don't know. I know he refused to be in a clinical trial. I'll have words with him if I ever get the chance to speak to him. When first locked down on the 27th of March, we were told it was for 3 weeks. So we got our first survey out 4 days after the lockdown. And then we were told on the 16th of April, oh no, it's going to be a further 3 weeks. So we hastily put together a second survey based on the answers we had after the first one. And how are the patients coping with it? It's not a 3-week problem, this is going to go on for much longer than this. On the 10th of May, the British government changed its motto to not stay at home, it was stay alert, control the virus and save lives. 10 out of 10 if you know what that means, because I don't, and neither do a lot of our patients. And he went on to do a final survey not long before the lockdown officially finished on the 4th of July, just to assess people's moods, how they're feeling, and how they were. So basically, most of the patients who responded to the survey, the first survey had over 800 participants, the second one over 1,000, and the third one way over 1,000. 60% of the patients were watch and wait, of which only 20% were on active treatment, but 40% had received treatment either now or before. And of this group, 94% were actually shielding at home, most of whom were retired, but about 33% were actually employment. At the time of contact them, 7% said they thought they'd had COVID symptoms at some time since the lockdown. When we actually look at their data, when did you lock down? If you just look, the big spike there's the 26th of March. We were told the lockdown was the 23rd of March. But if you see, quite a few patients that decided even before the government had said to lock down his shield, that they were going to do it anyway. And after the government said this, very, very few patients actually didn't shield. So they took the government advice very well. If you look at the bottom left, people thought, the patients thought they were well advised by the government. They thought they understood why they're being asked to shield. How this affected their care, on the right side, 20% were still getting hospital appointments, but 88%, most of the care was actually be delivered virtually over Skype and Zoom, or maybe not Zoom after what's happened, maybe something more reliable. Next slide. As the survey went on, it became apparent we had a growing number of people who were obviously emotionally struggling with this. 16% of patients actually near the end thought they needed professional help with the way they were feeling. We're quite interested in the bottom left, as you see, the government message got blurred over time. So by the end of the lockdown period, most people weren't clear exactly what they should be doing and why. On the right, there were 165 people who initially shielded and then decided they wouldn't anymore. And amazingly, almost half of those were due to, they said their healthcare professional told them they didn't need to shield, which is a bit of a surprise to me anyway. Some had mental health issues, almost 10% actually couldn't carry on doing it. So they basically came out to shielding, and there's a few with work, but on the whole, they thought it was advice from either the healthcare professionals or other government agencies who said they didn't need to. At the start of the pandemic, how many people were actually concerned about it? You see at the top left, a lot of people were very, very concerned about this. As you see on the right-hand side though, they weren't actually concerned about accessing their medications. Very few patients were concerned that they weren't going to access the drugs that were actually keeping them going. I think that's a credit to everyone involved in keeping the hospitals going and liaising with the patients and talking to their patients. In the bottom left, most of them were worried about themselves and their families, more the families than themselves. This is, as I say, mostly retired age group, about 60% retired and financially okay, but they're mostly worried about the next generations coming through. If you see in the bottom right, most of them were not worried about money, which is a bit of a surprise considering 33% were still working. That actually the furlough scheme the government brought in, I think did stop a lot of anxiety. When we asked them where they were getting their information from though, this was very interesting because actually an awful lot of it came from support group or charities. Almost 40% were getting their information that made their decision making actually from the third sector, as we would call it. Interestingly, less than 15% actually getting it from the government. Only 8% were getting it from the hospitals, which is really surprising considering these were hospital patients. So it's all sort of formats for it, but mostly it came from the charities and support groups. On to what the clinician survey showed. Thankfully, most of the patients were male, so we think we got a representative group. It was a well-motivated, back one slide, sorry. It was a well-motivated group. Next. Oh, all right. Most of them had their flu jabs, I should say. Most of them had the flu jabs. Half of them had never had treatment ever of the patients who ended up in hospital. Oh, there's the flu jab. Most of them had had the flu jab, in fact. It's a well-motivated group of patients. A lot of them had other comorbidities. We are dealing with an elderly group, a retirement group, but a quarter of them didn't. Interestingly, of those people who end up in hospital with COVID, almost 60% had hypogammaglobulinemia. If you compare that with our patient survey, only 12% of our patient survey. So that implies that hypogammaglobulinemia was a risk factor for developing COVID and ending up in hospital. Interestingly, 2/3 of the patients had never had a previous infection requiring hospitalization. So most of these patients were actually new to an infective problem. Very, very interestingly, having shown at the beginning, 94% of our patients were shielded. When you see it, those who ended up in hospital with COVID, 60% were not shielding at all. So clearly shielding protected those patients with CLL who managed to stay at home. All those patients, bar 2, who developed COVID, actually got admitted to hospital. But actually, only 13 of the 62 patients required mechanical ventilation. Most of them actually recovered without it. But I contrast that with this slide. If you actually look, the patients who didn't survive is almost 50%. That contrasts with 27% in our own hospital. But of that 30 patients, sorry, back one slide, of that 30 patients succumbed, only 13 of that 30 got mechanical ventilation. So I'm providing you very preliminary data. We need to drill down in the data. Why did the other 17 not get that? Were they extremely elderly? Did they have other cancers? Did they have other comorbidity? Or were people actually saying that maybe CLL is an incurable disease and maybe they don't actually warrant ventilation? We need to look at all this. One interesting thing, it didn't seem to matter what therapy you were on. No therapy protected you from COVID more than any other. You were just as likely to end up in hospital with COVID if you were receiving a BTKI as you were receiving FCR. So in conclusion, multi-agency, all these groups working together, I think providing valuable information we're still working on. It was very clear patients and clinicians were very keen to participate in this. None of us knew what to do. We had no evidence base. Shielding appeared to protect CLL patients very well from COVID. Most patients tolerated shielding well, but we have got a significant minority who do need help. It didn't seem to matter your clinical stage, past or present therapy. Over half the patients got admitted with stage A, never needed treatment. Hypogammaglobin and comorbidities seem to be particular risk factors for ending up in hospital with COVID. It does look like the mortality rate may be higher than it is in other patient groups. This is very preliminary. We need to dig down and get more information. Over half the patients who died did not receive mechanical and ventilation. We need to understand why. And no therapy appeared safer than any other when it came to actually protecting you from life-threatening COVID. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know about you, but I've sure learned a lot from our faculty today, both the patients, the advocates, and the physicians. But this is the part that I enjoy the most, which is getting to ask your questions that you've put forward. And I'm going to start this one to the advocates. And that is, we've talked a little bit about the relationships between professional organizations and patient-facing charities. Where, like, I'm thinking about Giora's with the transporting patients. Where does pharma come into this? Do they have a role to play? Can you explain how you can? Is there a trifecta that you can set up here with pharma the professional organizations? And anybody's welcome to answer, but why don't you start with it, Giora, and then if Pierre or Felice or Nick want to jump in, please go for it.
Well, thanks. I think that's an essential triangle, the doctors, pharma, and the patients. It's a collaboration, it's a mass collaboration. And I'll give you an example. The transportation project was almost solely funded from funding received from all pharma companies that have interest in blood cancer. Each one of them have donated to this project, and we are operating now 5 months solely on the funding they gave, and plus private people started donating to that too. The other example, for example, is that when a pharma wants to support a researcher, a doctor, and for example, CLL, we have a very good CLL doctor expert in Israel who believes that through alternative treatment like meditation and other, she can improve the situation of CLL patients who are on wait and watch. So she started doing a study on that, recruiting patients and giving them alternative treatment during the wait and watch period. And she has seen initially that really the blood counts are improving, the overall health is improving, and she wanted to expand. Now, pharma cannot sponsor that directly, giving money to the doctor on a project like that. So actually, we, the patient organization, took overall the control of the project, and we are raising the funds from the pharma, and we are paying all the suppliers who are running all this project. So that's another example, and there are many more examples like that, where the pharma and the patient organization and the researchers, the doctor, can collaborate and work together.
Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Either of the doctors want to add something about working with pharma and patient groups at the same time?
Yes, I have a personal experience about collaboration between pharma and the physician. And many times, as Giora said, the pharma try to run project for their needs, market needs. Sometimes is not ethical, and my charity don't agree. And when we have a contribution receive a contribution by pharma, we see a disclosure about the use, the influence of the pharma in the project. For example, the CLL patient journal, the project I showed before, was running by a donation by a pharma, but the pharma was not involved in the design of the questionnaire, was not involved in the analyze the result, but they help us to organize meeting, to support logistic for the meeting, for the running questionnaire, survey, but the survey was run by the patient and physician. This is, in my opinion, the good modality to work ethical and trust with the pharma. Otherwise, is more time is market needs and not patient needs and non-research needs.
I agree with Felice. If the patient want to be involved in the development of therapies, of drugs, etc., they have to talk to the pharma. They have to come in relation with the pharma, with the health authorities as well. If we want to do that, we have to get formed, and we have to have in our staff, in our among our volunteers, patient experts. If we don't have enough competence, then we can be lost. and we can be swallowed by the industry, which wouldn't be a good point. So it's quite important, and it's not that easy to become an expert.
Can I give another example with your permission? It's not always about money. I give you another example. Sometimes I get approached from clinicians who need a drug which is not reimbursed in my country for a blood cancer patient. And the clinician go to the company who is producing the drug and asking them to give it on compassionate or early access agenda. In many cases, they are being refused because the Israeli office of the company needs to get approval from the global office. And then they come to us, to the patient organization, can you support? And not in one case and not in two cases, in quite many cases, when we go together and we join forces between us, the patient, the organization, and the clinician, it's much more difficult for pharma to say no to a patient organization asking for a life-saving drug for a patient than saying no to the doctor. And there is a lot of synergy when we come together, the patient and the clinician together, and asking pharma to support. And I think this is something that we could do together.
Anyone else want to add other comments?
Yeah, I think what it said was it's very important, and I really do think collaboration with pharma on our terms is important. So I mean, well, yes, we need them, but I think they need us more. And I think as long as, you know, obviously ABPI changed quite a lot. There is much more transparency. Pharma has got money which is dedicated to education for healthcare professionals and patients. So they are definitely interested talking to us. And I think as long as, you know, it's transparent, and we as clinicians and patients have got our own agenda, which is obviously need to be transparent and independent of pharma.
Nick, a question for you. When you're setting up these collaborations with industry, how much is dependent on their structure, their hierarchy, getting to the people there, and how much is dependent on the friendships you have, your local physician who's maybe a CLL expert? I'm just looking for an organization who's looking to link, and sometimes they know one doc, but they don't know the organization. They may know somebody who's a member of IWCLL, but they don't know IWCLL. You know, what advice do you give to another charity in terms of starting that collaborative process?
I guess your question wasn't about industry. that was the prior one. About developing relationships with the clinical community. Well, I guess I'm a prime example of that. You know, my previous doctor to the current doctor was Professor Chris Fagan, who's sitting here, and I'm going through the journey myself. You know, Chris was somebody who was able to give a leg up and was always there to support the initiatives. So I think it's in the interest of the clinical community to also help you grow. And it's about building relationships and networking. So I think it's an evidence-based. You know, I still recall questions I've had, you know, early on when a clinician would say, well, actually, what support can you provide? What can you do? As long as you can evidence that, you've got to start somewhere. So start small, build a relationship up, build trust and relationship, and work with the clinical community to help also network you. That would be an input. I don't know if the clinical community, in terms of Chris or Renata, have got anything to say in that. Yeah.
I think certainly something which probably, you know, it not only helps, obviously we want to collaborate, and as I mentioned in my clinic room, it's a patient who is making decision, it's not me. I'm facilitating the decision, but I think what helps, especially within the UK, we always have to have a patient representative in the clinical trial subgroups, so we cannot. So for instance, when we go to charity, when we apply for funding for clinical trials, we need to have opinion from patient groups and patient representative. So that's written in law, the way we try to get money in the UK. So I think that's obviously, you know, it's a big help. I mean, but also we do want to work with you.
Dr. Fagan, switching gears a little bit here, Professor, I'm just massively impressed that you could pull together a survey 4 days after the shielding. You've got to give us some tips on how you pull together the clinical community, the patient community, and we're able actually to get something approved and done, and you didn't bump your head against the bureaucracy. What magic do you have there?
Well, you touched on something very important, Brian. So basically, myself and Renata had the idea. I then contacted Nick about it because we wanted the two prongs to work. The hospital we could use the CLL forum for, and the BSH use it to advertise, but we needed the patient side as well. And because we all knew each other, it really wasn't a problem. Getting the questions together, we had to quickly get, I put a lot of questions together, Renata had some. We got a statistician involved from Swansea University. As it turns out, he's my younger brother, so he's used to doing what he's told. And he put the database together. But of course, Nick had to pass it by the exec board of the Leukemia Care and CLL support to make sure they were happy, because this was going out in their name. And back to that collaboration, that obviously I couldn't think of questions, well, there's a lot of questions I would like to have asked the patients, but they as charities and advocacies, it's not easy for them to do it. But we still managed to drill down into finances, personal things as we went through the survey. So basically, you have like-minded people, but we all had the same problem. There was no evidence base. We were all just dangling around, giving our best opinions, but we really wanted something more than that. It's not often you go into a clinical arena, whatever it is, without actually any evidence base guiding you. But we all had to go into this. We got very little information from China at all. North Italy happened so quick that really we had to sit and give our best opinions, but we wanted to back it up. It really just was willing people who realised that unless we worked together, we weren't going to get these answers on our own, and we could get more bang for our buck by actually engaging with this. So the three strands of the clinicians, the advocacy groups, and a bit of IT support. But one important thing was this research or was this not? We did it deliberately. I'm an R&D director. It's not research. The data had to be anonymized throughout. It couldn't be anything too personal that you could identify the patients from. So you had to get through those hoops, but by actually making it a survey which people volunteered to give on the patient side, on the clinician side, it was routine gathered data, nothing specific. We weren't asking to do it prospectively, it was all retrospectively, that actually it was a survey, not a study. And that's really important when you're trying to do these things, of not falling foul of the regulatory process.
Could I add something to that just very briefly? I think another part of and reason why it was easy to expedite quickly was the significant involvement of the patient group and the patient population themselves, and that strength of connection between the four of us in the collaboration enabled a swift ratification of the types of question, making sure that the questions were collected from the patient groups who collected them from patients in a focus group. And it amazed me the speed that was turned around, so that we were able to actually set that, and then the resources of Leukemia Care were able to create the digital capacity to be able to support that quite quickly. But we mustn't forget the patients in this. The patients were isolated, they wanted to help, and the route to helping was through the patient group and the strength of relationship with the clinician.
Let me open this to anyone who wants to answer, and it's a question that's come up in a couple different ways. We've heard all about how important collaboration is, but like every medication, collaboration can have its side effects, its problems, its bumps. What are the disadvantages? Is there any counsel you have to other groups in terms of what to watch out for in terms of collaboration. I'm going to start with one. When you collaborate, you've got to be very clear on what your goals are, because the people you're collaborating with might have a goal that's similar, but a little off track to yours. And you can easily get diverted, especially as a patient who can be sometimes a little bullied by the physician saying, but this is a more important direction to go in, where we have access to the patients. And the other is, despite Professor Fagan and Nick's and your success, I've just found sometimes the red tape that gets involved when I pull in a university or a physician group involved in a project slows things down terribly. So those are my things that I run into, but I'm just wondering if anybody else has other disadvantages they see to the collaborative process.
Well, disadvantage, I don't think. So, I mean, the collaboration is very positive. I don't see any disadvantage, but I see many difficulties. And among the difficulties, I see, well, I mean, the patients are quite different, and the clinicians are quite different as well. And you have still, I am only speaking from France, huh? But I guess it could be the same in other countries. You have still clinicians that are not really interested in the patient, but rather in the diseases. So, I mean, in that case, you have to use other arguments. And that's for me the main difficulties. And we have in France 2 categories, and of course it's improving really. So my feeling is really that it is improving, and the presence of the patient in all the pathway is more and more considered. It's as it had been stated by Renata, also clearly part of the law. And the rules, but well, you need efforts with some part of the clinicians.
And maybe this is a first world question, but someone asked about how do we know that this isn't just tokenism, that we're just a checkbox. Giora talked about this a little bit, you know, we'll give a booth to the patients. Now we've done our patient bit. But when it comes to the real decisions, let the professionals handle that, because we really know what we're doing. So how do we avoid being just sort of a checked box so that they can go ahead and get their grant and we're not marginalized? I'd love people's opinions or advice or experience on that issue.
I think that probably, if I can jump in, I think probably, obviously, you as a very professional, experienced patient who knows the disease inside out and getting involved in writing guidelines, I think this is how you know, you can change things. So patients who you know, who know really their disease, and basically essentially anyone who gets involved in those you know, with Leukemia Care, CLL Support Association, or Italian, French equivalent, you guys are the experts really. And you know, and I think it would be really arrogant from a clinician to, you know, to tell you what to do. I think this is a peer discussion, and should be peer discussion. Yeah, it's my job, but you are the person who are actually living with what I'm going to try to suggest. So, you know, I think it should be a not just an information and throwing down what you don't want. Of course, there are patients who you know, look at the clinicians as God and they do what they say, but you know, I think the attitudes are changing.
Anyone else want to add to that?
And just to follow Renata said, I am personally involved. I was asking from invite from Italian Society of Hematology to help them to collaborate, to work in the working group, in the steering committee who managed the guideline on blood disease. And this is a good point of view. And I work with the physician. They talk a scientific term, but it's not problem for me. And I suggest what is better for the point of view of patient. This is a great opportunity, is a great open mind from the community, Italian community. And I think this is also a good experience for the other country. Is important at this point, no?
You know that when I listen to Renata, I really get envy. And, you know, in Israel, the Israeli law is based on the British law. And I wonder where has this law that you must involve patient has disappeared somewhere on the way. So I hope it will arrive to Israel also sometime. And I think that the only way is where you can overcome challenges like we have, like Pierre has described some of the doctors who are not really collaborators, is we have to convince them what is the added value if they work with the patient, the expert patient organization, and what do they get also for themselves and in importance. So I can give an example. For example, in Israel, the NICE is called, we have an HTA agency here, which convenes once a year for 3 months and is discussing all the new treatment and drugs that are going to be approved for the next year, the following year. And when I came at the beginning to the clinicians who were members of this board and tried to get the collaboration to identify patients who are on the new treatments, which are, for example, ibrutinib is now being asked to go for GVHD patients who have gone through transplant, and it's they are going now for approval. So when I go to the doctors and ask them, can you connect me to patients who are treated with ibrutinib so we can fill the form that the HTA authority asks patients to answer and give how the drug is influencing. So they, at the beginning, they used to tell me, why do you need this patient to tell? We know everything that is happening to them because we give them the drug. So we know how they feel and we know how the drug is influencing them. And that's so untrue. And Felice knows it quite well as I do, because we participated in a research that shows the difference between the perspective of the clinician and the patient on the severity of side effects and how it influences the patient. What the doctor think, what the patient think is completely two different words related to some side effects. So I think when they learn what is the added value, that we can get together drugs, for example, approved for patients, and when they learn that working together improves the acceptance of the drug and the reimbursement, then when they are convinced that it's not a tick box they have to do, and they really start working with the patient organization.
Can I just add, I think it comes down to respect and what does each party bring to the table. And what you have is your patients. You can do surveys of your patients, and that empowers you because you have something the clinicians don't have. So if, for example, you surveyed your patients and 40% were unhappy with their care generally, but let's say one hospital was 60%, that's actually powerful information that you have that the clinicians don't. So I think starting off, how do you empower yourself as a national group or a disease group? What you have got, if you've got patients, you know what treatments they're on, you know their side effects, you know how satisfied they are with the healthcare they're receiving. And I very much urge people, you start from that. And that's why people need to listen to us, because we have information that you haven't got. Unfortunately, in COVID, I had one day to be off work and there's Judge Judy on all day. And my daughter told me that 20 times in an hour, she said, don't tell me what I think. Clinicians do, without meaning to, think they know what patients think.
Yeah, I agree completely.
You have the power to change that.
And to pick up from Chris's point, I think, you know, the good information, so, you know, understanding the side effects, understanding how it works, what to do, those patients do better. And and we want good results. So I think, you know, picking up Chris's point, so if you can do the survey and actually those empowered patients do better, that becomes really powerful tool.
And I would add to that, that if you want to make an impact on physicians, you need data. And the stronger the data, the better. And other people have talked about this. So if you go in and give some case reports, those are going to be anecdotes and they're going to be dismissed. And I've spoken in front of physicians, and as soon as I put up a slide that has a pie graph or has a, you know, bar chart, now I'm valid. Now I'm really talking on their language. But if I give a case report about a 70-year-old male who's got this and that, they've completely tuned out. Now, if Dr. Fagan gave that talk, they would listen to him about the 70-year-old guy, but not to a patient giving that story. So we've got to recognize that that's an issue. I'm going to shift gears because we're closing up soon, but one of the issues that's important to all of us as advocates and all of us as physicians that has come up is, how do we ensure access to these expensive drugs? What about the drug cost? How do we make sure that they're paid for? This obviously is going to vary from country to country, but what are there collaborative ways that we can be working as patient organizations with professional organizations to make sure that we're not in a situation that Renata found herself in, where a patient needs a certain drug, but has to jump through 100 hoops to get to it? What can we be doing to help in those circumstances, to control the costs and the access?
Brian, before that, I would emphasize the point, what you said, if you have data, you can speak to the clinician and be more efficient. It's the same towards the health authorities. If you answer the question of the health authorities, for instance, for the new drugs and the expensive ones, if you have data, if you have surveys, if you have testimonies or whatever of this kind, it's much more efficient. That's from our experience.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I have just a comment about price of the drug. This is Christ. 20 years ago, when it was approved imatinib, the price of the drug coming little by little to increase. Each new target therapy increased the price, and I'm working for a company, automotive company. So the price of our car is based on the market needs of the market, but for the drug, if are a product drug, the price is put with no evidence. We don't know how it's based on. The people say it's based on one drug arriving to the market and 10,000 drug was tried to developing. But the price is the same for imatinib and the same story for imatinib. But why the price is different, increased more and more, as Renata said in her presentation before. The price is lock the access, is the very barrier for the people, especially in low middle-income country. I don't understand why, for example, in Italy, when the drug was approved and for reimbursement, the price come down 50% loss, less than in the USA. Or sometimes it's not clear. It's not possible to publish the negotiation about the reimbursement, and each country, the same in Europe, have different prices, different reimbursement. I don't understand this. It's crisis, it's not a market. It's just to say you would like to live, so pay. if you take care of your health, please pay. Otherwise, you have money, your insurance in USA. If you have insurance, you have no problem. Then we need to reflect and to create a movement and an opinion to understand the basic of the price, the right price, what is the right price.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think that what Felice was trying to say, there is no right price from the company. The companies will charge the maximum they can take. And if you take, for example, imatinib, the drug that he was taking and I was taking for 14 years, and when the patent finished, the price of the imatinib is 170. Producing imatinib cost 170 euros a year, and the price and the drug was sold around 30,000 euros a year in the Europe and 100,000 dollars in the US. So there is no connection between the cost of production and the prices. Now, we know that the prices are a challenge for the access, and not only in developing countries, but also in countries in Europe and Middle and Central and Eastern Europe, certainly. And we know that there are some doctors' organizations that are trying to change it. And I think that this is an opportunity where we can put our hands together and together come out with a demand to make more clarity and systemize the pricing of the drug to allow better access for the treatment to all patients.
I think what I could jump in here, because obviously US is the biggest market, clearly, by virtue of size. What US really needs, or what we all need, is nice type of organization in the US. So somebody actually scrutinizes why, you know, and looks at that efficacy, why, you know, is it, you know, I know it's quite a tough questions, because basically what NICE is looking, is it efficient to spend that much money for this problem?
Yep.
And they compare it to, you know, how many cataracts you can have it done for us, and how many, obviously they don't compare it like that, but, you know, there is special levels. So if US had NICE, I don't think we would be in that problem.
Yes, is I think the only American on this panel. I agree that there's lots of places that we could be doing a better job on things, but as a CLL patient, I do enjoy that I have access to just about everything, and not everybody is as lucky as we are in the US. And so there's advantages and disadvantages to both systems that would be a whole other webinar that we can talk about. I would share with you, for example, that when I needed a medication, I'm Canadian too, in Canada, pioneered some of this work that's done and now used to evaluate the value of the drug. The drug that I needed was not available in Canada, and I wouldn't be here if I wasn't able to get the drug. The drug was approved in Canada, it just wasn't paid for, and there's no way I could have afforded it. So, you know, there's, you know, both sides to all of these stories. So we could go on and on about that. I want to thank everybody. Maybe Nicole, we can put up the concluding slides. And I think despite our electronic bumps in our boot out by Zoom a couple times, I think we did a good job of recovering. It was kind of like running hurdles. I want to make a special thanks out to Renata for the work that she's done in terms of working with patients through her organization, and just being available to the CLLAN in general, and to the UK CLL community in particular. I've known Professor Fagan for years, and it's always wonderful to work with him. Nick, did you want to say any thank yous or concluding notes?
I think I'd just like to make thank yous to the broader panel and for the perseverance and endurance and the quality of the information you've provided today. It's astounding. And I feel grateful that we've had such experienced members in our advocacy community to join us to be able to add a lot of colour and variety and depth to the information. And following on with the thanks, especially to Renata and CLL Forum for the work they do, I have to at the national level, and Chris Fagan for supporting CLL Advocates Network, especially at the last CLL Horizons in person, in bringing the clinical community together with the patient community at IWCLL. We were making great headway there, and then COVID happened, and we sort of are making baby steps again digitally with a few bumps in the road. So thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, everyone. This will be archived. We'll piece together the front half and the back half. Thank you for all of those who persisted through this. And I'm very grateful to all the panel. I sure learned a lot from my fellow CLL patients and from the doctors aboard. Nicole, is there anything that I'm forgetting to do here? All right, well, thanks everyone. And I think with that, we'll sign off, and thanks everyone for their time. Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.